Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the 10UN Academy series, and this is English Nerd. So I am going to attempt to finish the All About Hamlet series today, talking about chapters 14 and 15, The Knitting Done and Footsteps Die Out Forever. This is bound to be a longer video because Dickens wraps up so many of the things that he's been laying the groundwork for all along that I'm just going to dive in without further ado. So The Knitting Done starts off with a secret meeting with the Vengeance, Jacques III, and Madame Defarge. Monsieur Defarge is not there because he actually has, he cares for Dr. Manette and has a weakness for him and for his family, namely Lucy and little Lucy, so all of the Manettes. And Madame Defarge has no such mercy. We saw in the Darkness chapter, 2 chapters before, that she will not stop at anything short of extermination. And so by leaving her husband out of this meeting, which is all about that extermination, she's thinking it'll expedite the process. She does stand up for him a little bit and say, yes, he's a good revolutionary, a good Republican, but he doesn't understand that we need to kill this entire family. And the Vengeance and Jacques III are all for it. So the split between Madame Defarge and Monsieur Defarge in the way they approach the revolution has literally driven them apart in this scene, at least. So Madame Defarge says, "I don't care anything for this doctor," and Lucy has been seen caring about Darnay, of course, and so we can pin that on her. It's a crime to sympathize with anybody going to the guillotine, and Jacques III agrees. He says, "We really have not heads enough. It would be a pity, I think, just to kill Dr. Manette or just to kill Darnay. We really have not heads enough," Jacques III says. This is just a perfect example of how the revolutionaries dehumanize their opponents. It's not that they want the guilty people to see justice done upon them, it's that there aren't enough heads to feed to this machine. The point now is not justice, the point now is just bloodthirsty, indiscriminate vengeance, much like that earthquake that Madame Defarge talked about way back in the Still Knitting chapter. So Madame Defarge says, "Lucy will now be at home awaiting the moment of his death. She'll be mourning and grieving. She'll be in a state of mind to impeach the justice of the Republic. She will be full of sympathy with its enemies. I will go to her." So Madame Defarge herself is going to catch Lucy in the act of caring about Darnay at the moment of his death, as any thinking, feeling person would do if their innocent husband were being killed. And so off she goes. There's an interesting page or so as Dickens talks about her heading to the residence that talks about how she is so pitiless that she doesn't even have pity for herself. The only thing that's left inside her is this desire for vengeance. It says that she doesn't see the innocence of Darnay, she sees her family and all that they went through, and she's determined to just end that whole saga by destroying them. Another interesting note that Dickens gives while she's on the way to the residence is that Madame Defarge is carrying 2 weapons with her. I don't know that she's planning to use them exactly because she's going to accuse Lucy of plots, and then the jury will take care of the rest. But it says that lying hidden in her bosom was a loaded pistol, and lying hidden at her waist was a sharpened dagger. So just keeping that in mind. There's more that we could say about that, but I'm not going to because of time. I want to respect that. Okay, so flash sideways to Jerry Cruncher and Miss Pross. I mentioned in the last video, and I'm sure you noticed that they were not in that carriage that escaped from France with Laurie, the Lucys, etc. It explains here that there were a couple of reasons. One is that they wanted the carriage to be lighter and faster, and if they could just shave off seconds and a better chance to escape from France on their way to England, then they would do it. And there were also a couple of things just to finish up with the residents, a couple more things to pack, and then Cruncher and Pross could follow them, because they're not servants in like the traditional sense, but that's kind of the role that they play with those families. So Cruncher and Pross, I love the dynamic between them when they're shopping, and it's just the cutest. So Cruncher says, I've noticed a couple things. My opinions have changed about a couple of things. He says, first, them poor things well out of this. Never no more will I do it. Never no more. And Miss Pross says, yeah, whatever it is, I'm sure you won't do it. And she's feeling all emotional. He's clearly talking about his honest tradesman side business of digging up dead bodies and selling them for science. He's seen enough dead bodies. He's over it. He has no desire to continue with that business. And then the second thing he changes his mind about is his wife's flopping, her praying. Because before, when she would flop, he's like, stop flopping against me, stop praying, because he thought that she was praying for some comeuppance to come to him, although that wasn't the case. So he says, my opinions respecting flopping has undergone a change, and that what I only hope with all my heart that as Mrs. Cruncher may be a flopping at the present time. Miss Pross doesn't understand any of what Cruncher's saying, because he says it in such a bizarre way, but she's agreeing like, yeah, you're right. I really hope she is too. But Cruncher is clearly concerned about them getting safely out of France, and so he hopes that his wife is praying. So so Miss Pross is going to go back to the residence where the Manettes were staying and finish up some things, and then she'll meet Cruncher in just a few minutes, and then they can take off. There's this great scene when Miss Pross goes to the house, and she's crying. She's really sincerely upset, and so she's washing her face in this basin. It says, Miss Pross got a basin of cold water and began laving her eyes, which were swollen and red. Haunted by her feverish apprehension, she could not bear to have her sight obscured for a minute at a time by the dripping water, but constantly paused and looked round to see that there was no one watching her. In one of those pauses she recoiled and cried out, for she saw a figure standing in the room. The dramatic tension is just so good here. She wants to see it. It's like, if you watch a scary movie and you get that creepy crawly feeling like somebody's watching you, and you don't want to close your eyes for too long. And in one of those times when she is able to open her eyes, who is standing behind her but Madame Defarge, only the scariest person, except for maybe Jacques 3, in this entire story. The person that you do not want to see standing behind you, the one who has it out for the family. So great dramatic tension there, but it's the little baby paragraph that follows that is more important. The basin fell to the ground broken, and the water flowed to the feet of Madame Defarge. By strange, stern ways and through much stained blood, those feet had come to meet that water. Okay, here's where we need to start talking about Pross and Madame Defarge. They are foils for each other. It didn't really look like it up to this point, but now that Pross and Madame Defarge are going to fight, which is just the best development ever, we need to see why it is that Dickens pits these two together. This description of the water falling and meeting the feet that have gone through all the stained blood, this blood versus water, is our first clue about why he pits these two together. Madame Defarge is represented by blood here, and Miss Pross is represented by water, which is something much cleaner and something cleansing and pure, as opposed to something bloody and vengeful. If you look back at where The Vengeance is planning to meet Madame Defarge, and Cruncher is planning to meet Miss Pross right after they both, run this little errand. You'll see that the Vengeance is going to hold the usual seat at the guillotine and meet her at the guillotine. And then Cruncher is going to meet Miss Pross at the cathedral. Okay, we're getting somewhere here. If you go back to it's chapter 4 of book 3, there's that comparison that I drew between the guillotine and the cross, that set of philosophies really that Dickens starts to explain. Here we see those philosophies going head to head. Madame Defarge represents the guillotine. The guillotine is always spoken about in feminine terms. It's motivated by vengeance. It's all about sacrificing others for self. It's all about the regeneration of the human race, as it says before, but in an external kind of way. The cross, on the other hand, is all about self-sacrifice for others. It's motivated by forgiveness. We've seen Miss Pross forgive even her brother Solomon, who's just a horrible person. She's one of the most forgiving people in this entire story. And it's motivated by love and all those things that I talked about before. It's clear that what we have here is the cross versus the guillotine. That's also why Pross is named Pross, by the way. Oh, yes, not every single name has meaning in Dickens, but names like Pross, rhyming with cross, that seems pretty indicative of something. Lorry being a type of vehicle going back and forth. He's really the one that goes back and forth between the two cities, the only one who does that several times. Lucy, the name, Lucy means light. She is a light throughout this book. She is the golden thread that brings light to others. Madame Defarge is planning to go and put out that light. And so here, names clearly in Dickens do have meaning about half the time, I'd say. Stryver is another one. His name describes the kind of person that he is. So this scene, it's absolutely magnificent. So they start, Madame Defarge demands to see Lucy. Pross understands, and so she starts standing in front of a door, pretending like Lucy's back there, because the longer she can stall Madame Defarge, the longer she'll be ignorant of where Lucy really is and won't go after her. So Pross is just throwing herself in the way of this force of Madame Defarge. As they're talking, though, there's this really interesting dynamic because each spoke in her own language. Neither understood the other's words. Both were very watchful and intent to deduce from look and manner what the unintelligible words meant. So Madame Defarge speaks no English. Miss Pross speaks no French. She's adamantly against it. And I think that is also perfectly symbolic of the type of people that they are. It's not just that they don't see eye to eye, it's that they can't they don't even speak the same language. I mean, if Miss Pross were to explain the concept of forgiveness to Madame Defarge in French, I think there would be that same kind of language barrier. They just don't understand. They're not coming from the same philosophical worldview. So that's largely what's going on. And we get this great insult battle back and forth. It's a lot like Shakespeare in a way. Miss Pross, it's terrible, but it's funny. Miss Pross says, "No, you wicked foreign woman, I am your match. I am your match." I mean, if you didn't get that they were foils before, Miss Pross basically says it here. It's kind of like at the end of Hamlet when Hamlet says, "I'll be your foil, Laertes." It's that sort of thing, if you watched my other series. And then Madame Defarge responds, "Woman imbecile and pig-like." It's like she suddenly goes all, like, I don't know, posh isn't the right word, but so they're insulting back and forth. Things are escalating, and it gets to the point where this happens. Okay, it says, Miss Pross's courage was of that emotional nature that it brought the irrepressible tears into her eyes. This was the courage that Madame Defarge so little comprehended as to mistake it for weakness. So once again, they don't understand each other's languages literally, and they don't understand each other really on any level. "Ha ha," she laughed, "you poor wretch, what are you worth? I addressed myself to that doctor." Then she raised her voice and called out, "Citizen doctor, wife of Evremond, child of Evremond, any person but this miserable fool, answer the Citizeness Defarge." And after a few more moments, they fight. Madame Defarge gets so fed up that she says, "I'll tear you to pieces, but I will get you away from that door." And so she lunges at her. And every year there are some people who are a little bit confused about what actually happens here in this fight. So let me help you out here. So Madame Defarge goes for the door. Miss Pross squeezes Madame Defarge and just holds her there because she's bigger than Madame Defarge and stronger, so she's able to do that. But Madame Defarge is so intent on getting there that she reaches for the gun that she has in her clothes, and it says this: Madame Defarge's hands were at her bosom. Miss Pross looked up, saw what it was, she's going to be shot, struck out a flash and a crash, and stood alone, blinded with smoke. So the misconception that my students often have is that Miss Pross shot Madame Defarge, that she took the gun and shot Madame Defarge. It's important to see that that's not the case. Madame Defarge has the gun. She's planning to shoot Miss Pross, who's holding her. Miss Pross, in the process of getting the gun out of her own face, hits at it, and the gun goes off. And that's what kills Madame Defarge, and that's what makes Miss Pross lose her hearing, because the gun goes off so close to her head. This is important because Miss Pross is not the kind of person who would grab a gun and shoot somebody point blank. She's desperate. She's willing to give up her own life for Lucy, but she's not willing to sacrifice others for herself, right? Because she represents the cross. Madame Defarge, on the other hand, is more than willing to sacrifice others for her own cause. She won't really do it again. She won't do anything again, because the strength of the cross, of that sacrificial love, is stronger than the hatred of that guillotine philosophy of sacrificing others for self. You see, there's this message that Dickens is trying to get across by pitting these two women together, who are actually similar in more ways than you realize at first glance. They're both willing to die for their causes, or do anything that's necessary. They're both fierce, independent kinds of women who will do anything for their cause. But the difference is profound as well, and Dickens uses these two to underline that point about sacrificial love. Okay, chapter 15, the footsteps die out forever. I'm just going to cut to the chase here. I could talk about this chapter for a long time, so... So, Madame Defarge obviously doesn't make it to the execution in this chapter, and the Vengeance is upset that she's going to miss it, since Madame Defarge has been looking forward to this particular execution for a long time. And then we see from Carton's point of view, he's in they're called death carts, these tumbrils that take all of the victims from the conciergerie to the place where the guillotine is set up. When I went to Paris, I actually passed the place. Well, I passed the conciergerie, which was fascinating. It looks like it's still used as a government building or something. And then I passed the place where the guillotine was stationed as well. Obviously, that it looks very different now. It's just like a street, but we didn't really get close enough to take a good picture. But wow, it brings it home to a person. Okay, so Carton is going. He's stayed with that seamstress that he met back in the 52 chapter, and they're holding hands. He's giving her strength. She's actually quite a brave person. She keeps saying, "Oh, I'm so weak and little," and it's like, stop that, seamstress. She's actually super brave. She just has one question. She's okay with giving her life as long as France is better off at the end of all of this, even though she's innocent, which is crazy. But she has a question right before she goes up. I mean, they're waiting in line. People are going up and being executed as they're having this conversation and trying not to look, instead of looking at each other. She says, "Do you think," the uncomplaining eyes in which there is so much endurance fill with tears and the lips part a little more and tremble, "that it will seem long to me, while I wait for my cousin in the better land where I trust both you and I will be mercifully sheltered?" So really her question is, she has one living relative, and it's this cousin, this little cousin, and she doesn't want to die and then have to wait, 60 years, 70 years, for her to see her cousin again, assuming that everything gets better in France and she does live that long. I mean, it's just such an innocent, beautiful kind of question. And Carton says, "It cannot be, my child. There is no time there and no trouble there." "You comfort me so much," she says. "I am so ignorant. Am I to kiss you now? Is the moment come?" "Yes." So at the last, I mentioned this with the last Carton chapter, but I'll say it again. Carton is now so strong, so changed, that he gives this enormous amount of comfort to this young girl when before he couldn't even comfort himself. It highlights that change inside him, which is so beautiful. So they kind of bless each other. They have this moment where they give each other a certain amount of strength. There's love between them, not like some sort of romantic love, I think, but just, Carton said at the beginning, "I am a disappointed drudge, sir. I care for no man on earth, and no man on earth cares for me." This was at the dinner with Darnay at the beginning of the story. Here, he can't say that. He cares for some people. Some people care for him. It's beautiful how that's all turned around. And then Carton's final thought, apart from the sort of epilogue that we get, where he has kind of a prophecy, he sees what's going to happen in the future. But apart from that, his final thought is that verse that he said back in the Game Made chapter, "I am the resurrection and the life, he that believeth in me," referring back to not only the religious hope that he has, it seems, because of that, and then what he says to the girl, but those two kinds of life that I mentioned too, that there's that external life which he's now losing. He goes up as he's thinking this, and he's the 23rd one to die. And then there's that internal life. So at this moment when he is losing one, he's clearly gained the other. At the beginning of the story it was flipped, but now he has this more essential kind of life, which is it's absolutely beautiful. So this chapter wraps up the resurrection theme super well, that paradox of life and death, which I've been talking about, how life and death are not these mutually exclusive things, but sometimes you have to go through death in order to get to life. And all those complexities that we've been looking at with Dr. Manette, and with all those fake funerals, and just all this evidence that it's not this black and white life and death dichotomy. Instead, there's barely even a line between the two. Really, the difference is, what kind of life do you have, or what kind of death do you have? Here, at the end of Carton's life, he is more alive than he was before, when he had more physical life. We also see that this also concludes that conversation on reason versus emotion as well, which I brought up at the beginning of the story. Mr. Lorry is a good representation of reason. Some of the mobs, like the one dancing the Carmagnole, are a good example of just pure emotion, no reason. And Carton, I think, underscores a door number 3. He's not the only one who does, but since the story ends this way, it's clearly what Dickens intended for us to see. He doesn't act purely on reason or purely on emotion. If he acted purely on reason, then there would be no reason for him to replace Darnay. He never really liked Darnay, and nobody's required to die for somebody else to go that extra mile. So reasonably speaking, it doesn't make sense what he's doing. If he acted solely on emotion, he wouldn't do this either, because if you think about it, if Darnay were killed, then Lucy would be a free agent once again, who would need a shoulder to cry on, perhaps a shoulder that looked identical to her former husband, and Carton would have a chance to sweep in there and have the happily ever after with Lucy if he were just going on emotion. But here he chooses something that is beyond both, that is informed by emotion, that works because of reason, and that is this sacrificial love. We see it with Carton, we see it with Pross. If we look retroactively all the way back, we see it with Lucy, and we just see everything leading up to this perfect expression of sacrificial love. It was foreshadowed even at the very beginning of the story when Carton asked Darnay to dinner and said, change places with him, and would I have been looked at by those blue eyes as he was? It's all there from the very beginning. All the foreshadowing, it's just absolutely outstanding. So what we're left with is this sort of epilogue. It says that people said about Carton that he had the peacefulest face that was ever beheld at the guillotine. He truly is satisfied with his choice here. He looked sublime and prophetic. So we get this sort of prophetic, this is what I see in the future. And most of it's really positive, actually. There are only a couple things that make me a little bit sad. Really, there's only one thing that makes me sad, and that is that before the guillotine goes out of use, he says that all of the revolutionaries that we've met are going to be killed by it, including Defarge. That's the only one that makes me sad. It's like, okay, well, Barsad, he might deserve it. The vengeance, yeah. But Defarge, I've always liked Defarge. You don't have to agree with me, but I like him. I don't think he always made the right decisions, but it makes me sad that we know that he dies by the guillotine as well. And after the guillotine dies out of use, it says that the city and the people will rise up triumphant. You get that speech that you actually hear at the end of Dark Knight Rises, the third Nolan Batman film, about the city rising from the ashes. It comes directly from Tale of Two Cities. And more importantly than those things, it says this. It's from Carton's point of view, so it's in first person. I see the lives for which I lay down my life, peaceful, useful, prosperous, and happy, in that England which I shall see no more. I see her with a child upon her bosom, who bears my name. And this is what he says about that child a little bit later on. I see that child who lay upon her bosom and who bore my name, a man winning his way up in that path of life which once was mine. I see him winning it so well that my name is made illustrious there by the light of his. I see the blots I threw upon it faded away. I see him, foremost of just judges and honored men, bringing a boy of my name with a forehead that I know and golden hair to this place, then fair to look upon, with not a trace of this day's disfigurement. And I'd hear him tell the child my story with a tender and faltering voice. Gosh, I made it through the whole thing. Almost. Anyway. So Sydney Darnay rises up and becomes everything that Carton was unable to be when he was alive. And it's a final beautiful reference to that kind of resurrection. It's not that it's him who got the second chance, but his reputation. It's like he got a second chance, which is just it's beautiful. It's through his death that all this life was possible. And it's through his sacrifice, it's through his love that all of this was made possible. And then we get the final the final line, which wraps everything up so beautifully. It says, "It is a far, far better thing that I do than I have ever done. It is a far, far better rest that I go to than I have ever known." And it's a beautiful line on its own, but one cool thing that it took me a minute to realize is that it makes sense of the first line. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That paradox becomes true at the end with Carton. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, at the same time and in the same person. Much like the crucifixion of Christ, it was the best of times and it was the worst of times simultaneously. There's a very similar vibe here with Carton. At his worst moment and his best moment are the same. So I'm sure I left out lots of really great details. There's no way to talk about every possible angle of this book, but I hope that you enjoyed the series and got something out of it. In a scholarly sense, I hope that it helped you, if that's what you were here for. If you were here just because you loved the book, like I love the book, then I hope you learned something new and you can appreciate it more now. So that is it for the All About a Tale of Two Cities series. If you have any questions about these final chapters or really about anything in the book, I'd love to hear them down below. And that's it. Make sure to subscribe for more English nerdy goodness, and I'll see you soon.